If you guys haven't seen part 1, a link to that should be near the top of the description, or potentially a playlist, depends on what future me does. Now, as a heads up, I am recording this basically the day after I had recorded my part 1 reaction to the Samurai Shodown history. I'm doing it this way before I've even uploaded or edited the previous video, because it's not raining right now and I have the opportunity to record. Since it's the rainy season over here, I kinda just have to take any opportunity that I can to get some content out to you guys. But if there's any feedback, any clarifications, any extra details that you guys have given me in the previous part, and I haven't incorporated them here, that is primarily the reason why, because I don't know that yet. Regardless, if for some reason you still haven't gone to support the original video, you can do so now, using the link at the very top of the description, like always. Show 5. Back to our roots. Although SNK lost the series, right?
As the arcade industry fell into a deep decline across the globe in the late 90s, and with their expensive Hyper Neo Geo 64 technology failing to have made an impact, SNK had to look down the very real barrel of bankruptcy in 2001. At the last second, however, it was saved by its original founder, Eikichi Kawasaki, who had established another company that same year named Playmore, who was able to win back the rights to all of SNK's properties. After a brief reorganization, SNK Playmore rose from the ashes and started reconnecting with other studios and teams they had worked with in the past, such as ADK, Brezasoft, and more. Unfortunately,
yeah, interesting. We're getting a couple more details in regards to that, because we had learned about this timeline already through Thorgy's retrospectives on King of Fighters. But now we're getting a different timeline, I suppose, more so concerning around Samurai Shodown and maybe in the future some of the other games that SNK had been managing at the time.
Of the original members of Team Samurai had left to join other companies, but since Kawasaki was looking to relaunch several of their fighting game series, Samurai Shodown included, he then turned to a relative unknown, Yuki Enterprise, to do just that.
Never heard of them.
Obviously, this would have been quite the challenge if Yuki had to start completely from scratch, so SNK provided them with code based on Samurai Shodown 4 so they could hit the ground running. That move definitely came in clutch, because at that time, Yuki had only experience working on simple 2000s releases, which really wouldn't have prepared them for the prospect of resurrecting a legendary 2D arcade fighter. Even working
Yeah, I don't know how I'd feel about that, to be honest. The games that I had worked on previously were along the lines of the footage that was shown. I don't know where I'd begin with this one.
Off the back of old code, though, Yuki wasn't shy about implementing some changes, which was fair considering it had been 7 years since the last 2D Shodown. The slash bus system was removed and replaced with, well, nothing really, as 5 was mostly concerned with upping the speed, reiterating mechanics, and introducing a gang of fresh characters.
I have to assume the slash bus system was removed in order to simplify the process a bit more, because it was essentially just like 2 different styles for the same character, right? So you basically be making 2 different characters. I don't believe there was a style chooser in the version that Kane and I played, so I think that's just going to be not going to be a thing anymore for the series. But who knows? Maybe more experimentation will happen down the line if Samurai Shodown does get picked up again.
Including, yep, you guessed it, another new protagonist. Everyone who had been present in Samsho 4 was obviously retained here, while the new faces included the likes of Yoshitora Tokugawa, Mina Magikina, Lu Yunfei, and finally the horribly stinky, monstrous meatbag that was Yukai Kusarageto.
I've seen this sprite in some fighting game videos. It's mostly used more of like a meme as a joke or alluding to something, but I've never actually learned about this character in particular. Did not know that he was from Samurai Shodown, but well, now we do.
While the slash bus system was removed, as previously mentioned, Yuki and SNK did see fit to reuse a bit of the core concept in other ways, namely by introducing Rira, who had been built off a bust version of Nakaruru, and who fought with an equally evil wolf friend Shikiru. Rasetsu Maru was a fleshed out version of the possessed evil Haomaru we saw in Samsho 64, and also inspired from that very same game, 5 properly introduced Enja and Suja, the primal elemental forces that the two brothers normally channeled.
Oh, hey. Did he normally have that ultimate? Because there is like a reference to it in the latest Samsho. Or maybe that is just his super.
Finally, in the why the hell not category, Poppy was also made playable for the very first time. Although she was pretty limited in terms of moveset. That's okay, girl, you're trying your best. Another part of the roster that saw a drastic overhaul was the bosses, and that they no longer contained any familiar faces this time around. There was a new mid-boss, the hammer-swinging Sankuro, not to be confused with Zankuro, along with a sorta unique, but not really sub-boss, Yumeji Kurokuchi, whose sprite and moveset was largely based on Ukyo, but who could also briefly turn into other fighters a la Shang Tsung. The new head of the table was the spear-wielding...
I guess it's following that idea of copying other fighting styles that you've seen and using it in your own unique style. It's a pretty cool gimmick that a lot of battles will use for their enemies or the villain characters.
Gao, a rebellious warlord who Yoshitora was gunning to take down, which basically encompassed the main plotline of 5. And make no mistake, Gao was no pushover, as whenever you managed to get him into his final phase, he resorted to turning into a big bad Beetleborg. As I alluded to earlier, there wasn't a ton of brand new elements to the gameplay of Samurai Shodown 5, which I suppose was a way to welcome new players to the franchise without overwhelming them.
Probably a good idea. It's a new development team, plus also the 3D games didn't go over so well, so returning back to our roots. It's been a while since that had happened, so yeah, I think it's a smart play. Hopefully this one did well, though.
The button configuration changed back to A and B for a strong slash, C for kicking, and D for defensive movement, which was technically a step back from what SNK had done before. Yuki did add short hops, rolls, and the quick dodge from Samsho 3, as well as a new sword meter that decreased your overall power the more you spammed attacks, which was at least an interesting attempt to try and mitigate the franchise's trademark high damage. There were some straight up omissions as well. The combo slash attack after pressing C and D together was removed, which was a bit of a shame, and overkills, which had made their debut in 4, were also nowhere to be found. Yuki did try to perhaps make up for this by adding a new state that players could trigger called Concentration 1. This briefly slowed down time and allowed you to connect a series of strikes together, much like Alpha 2's custom combos. This state also let players pull off the returning lightning blade attacks, which still ended the round decisively, although the usual blood sprays which followed them were toned down somewhat. In fact, the fatality effects like bisection and the arterial spray were also missing in 5, which was something that Yuki eventually would go on to rectify.
Oh, okay. I guess due to player feedback. This one's a bit of a roller coaster, right? Where there are some things that I think that's a pretty cool idea actually to add into the series. And then there are some other things where it's like, why did we remove this one? Of course, I haven't played it. I'm just watching a video on it. But maybe a bit more of a mixed reception due to that fact. With all this experimentation going on, that's kind of just how it's gonna go.
Yeah, perhaps a bit too much. Now, moving on to ports, many English-speaking fans were probably most familiar with the original Xbox version, which was released in early 2006, and which saw a number of small changes, like Sankuro and Yumeji being made playable, as well as something that had been missing from the arcade version that was distributed outside of Japan. Either because of time or budgetary reasons, a ton of pre-match cutscenes were just not included in the English arcade and Neo Geo versions, something that even extended over to character endings. After a long grueling match, if you happened to be Gao, the game would just bam, hard cut to the end credits. That really sucked, because unlike the last few games in the series, endings in 5 were very similar to those in Samsho 1 and 2, complete with unique sprites and scene changes. Thankfully, that was all corrected and restored for both the Xbox and the Western PS2 port, which...
Okay. Very good, very good. I definitely hope that fighting games that come out in the future or that are about to come out do play a bit more of a heavy emphasis or put more of a heavy emphasis on the story mode, because fighting games always had a problem of appealing towards casual players, and I think having a compelling story and narrative is kind of where that pull would be. So things like Marvel Tokon or the new Virtual Fighter that's about to come out. Well, I say about to. Do we even have a release date? I don't think we do. But from all the stuff that they talked about and shown, it feels like that's more so the direction that they want to take it in, while still maintaining that high level of esports potential. I just think fighting games have the potential to be so much more than what it's currently perceived as like a niche genre that only people who are super serious about it can actually play. Like, genuinely, it's really baffling to me that you could have people who play rhythm games and they play it very, very well on super high difficulties, mashing buttons that I definitely wouldn't be able to input in time. But then they're like, nah, I don't play fighting games because I wouldn't be able to react to any of that. It'd be too hard to press the buttons in the right order. Like, what is even the difference? I think the difference really is just that perception. Once you actually try it out, you'll see that it's not as scary as you thought it was. But that first step into the door is the hard part.
Wait, what Western PS2 port? Well, in the mid-2000s, Sony Computer Entertainment of America had a weird, massive hate boner for 2D fighters, so they blocked SNK Playmore from releasing 5 in North America. But fortunately, Sony Europe was far more accommodating. It should be noted as well that both Western versions, the Xbox and PS2, saw some pretty big changes when it came to the presentation, in that the opening intro had been changed to English, along with the round and winner announcements, which was a first for the franchise.
Destined to kill all who come before me. Samurai Shodown 5.
This might have had something to do with Ignition Entertainment's involvement, as they started localization services around this time, and would go on to help SNK publish KOF 12 a few years later.
Okay.
While certainly a decent debut for Yuki overall, the home ports of 5 didn't review very well in mainstream outlets and magazines, seeing low scores across the board, which wasn't too surprising, as 2D fighters were very much being ostracized by the games industry in and around that time. Samsho 5 would then be forgotten.
It was like, what? Street Fighter 4, was it? Was when 2D fighters started to come back. It was just a downtime for fighting games in general. And I guess it also didn't help that there were a lot of fighting games being released at the time that just didn't really fulfill that need that people are looking for. It's like a little bit of time in order to get that.
Quite quickly, due to another reason, which was the fact that Yuki immediately started work on an update that pretty much invalidated 5's existence from then on out.
What the hell? Special.
Samurai Shodown 5 Special was Yuki's attempt to polish, rebalance, and reiterate on what had come before, much like Fatal Fury did back in 1993. Changes were made to the UI, along with new key character art. There were various gameplay readjustments, new music and stages, along with some old returning ones, and finally a bunch of old bosses and way more violence. Let's start with those roster changes. Zenkuro, Amakusa, and Gao were now all playable straight out the gate. But an even more surprising move, Mizuki from Samsho 2 also made her return with a completely new sprite.
That's
Oddly,
cool.
though, both Sankuro and Yumeji were nowhere to be seen, which might have been a storage space issue. But the main thing Yuki implemented,
I guess maybe, but also one of the characters was just using a bunch of moves from other characters that were already in the game. Don't think it would have taken too much to implement that, since you already had the moves there. But then, yeah, I don't know the technical side of things or the current hardware that they were working with.
Here was putting overkills back on the menu and made sure to go super hard on them. If you'll recall, the finishers SNK designed for 4 were mostly combo flurries, powered up specials, stuff like that. But in 5 Special, every character was given a unique, elaborate fatality sequence that pushed the limits of violence in a 2D Japanese arcade game. There were
Maybe the extra space needed for these fatalities was what took away the two characters. Plus, I mean, the three additional characters on top of that certainly didn't help. But I have to assume that there probably weren't too many fans of the two missing characters, and there were probably a lot more fans of the three previous characters, or I guess new ones added into this game in particular.
There were beheadings, explosions, heart rips, blood raves, and even a little cannibalism, as a treat. New gore effects were added too, like being divided into 4, bodies getting vaporized, and even split down the middle Kung Lao style. This uptick in violence actually got SNK into some hot water when it came to the home ports. And when I say home ports, I mean just the one. Sam Show 5 Special for the Neo Geo, which happened to be the last commercially released game for the hardware, was slightly delayed and then hastily censored in the wake of a real-life violent crime incident which caused much concern in Japan when it occurred in 2004. Fans of Sam Show, though, were not happy about the change, as the overkills and gory effects were toned down and or removed so quickly that it caused unintended side effects and bugs that SNK had to fix with later cart revisions.
Well, damn. That's kind of unfortunate timing, isn't it? It always makes me roll my eyes, though, when people say that, like, video games are the reason why the youth are so violent and shit like that. Like, any sane person can tell reality from fiction, and video games are certainly not a reality. And of course, if there is an individual out there who cannot tell the difference, then they probably shouldn't be playing video games, or somebody should not be allowing them to play any sort of video games that are like this in the first place. I suppose it's just a lot easier to say that video games are the reason why my child is the way that he is, instead of just like, maybe it's due to my negligent parenting that has caused this.
And even then, these versions still didn't properly restore everything. And unlike previous entries, the Neo Geo version was the only home port that was produced at that time, so fans just sorta had to deal with it. On the flip side, though, there were some of the opinion that Yuki had taken the violence a bit too far, and that the new overkills felt more at home in Mortal Kombat than they did in Sam Show. As an aside, it would take SNK a further 10 years to properly re-release Sam Show 5 Special on modern systems. Anyway, I still have a little bit more on the overkills and their animations, as they did affect another area of the game, and that was the story sequences and endings. Since Neo Geo hardware had to use the same size carts to make upgrading easy and painless for arcade operators, Yuki couldn't keep shoving more and more stuff into each game without taking something out to compensate. So for Special, those pre-match dialogue scenes from 5 had to be removed.
Damn.
That couldn't have been an easy choice to make, though, and one that Yuki would seek to rectify in the final revision of Samurai Shodown 5.
Oh, there's more? Okay. Special version 2! Special! Samurai Shodown, perfect! Perfect!
Yuki Enterprise employee and the then series director Kuji Takaya had one final goal of perfect: fix any bugs and issues that were left over from Special and add brand new story elements. These new story elements revolved around Kuroko setting off to find the best warriors he could to fight in a grand tournament that would be hosted by Yoshitaro Tokugawa, culminating in him handing a written invite to your chosen character once you completed the game. This new storyline was made in an attempt to tie it to the events of another then upcoming Samurai Shodown game, which of course fed into the rather unique situation about how perfect came to be, or not to be in this case, kinda. As the story goes, SNK higher-ups were not told that Yuki were developing Perfect, and shortly after its first test location went down at a game center in Japan, those same SNK higher-ups decided to draw their own swords. They promptly cancelled Perfect's development because they themselves were finally working on their own new entry in the background, which Takaya had been aware of, and was why he wanted to craft a new story that would set the stage for it. But SNK were the rights holders at the end of the day, so they went forward with their project while Perfect would be relegated to the dustbin of history. That was until
dude.
2020 when it was finally included in the Neo Geo Samurai Shodown collection. Digital
Okay.
Eclipse, who were contracted to develop the collection, were able to locate an unfinished ROM of Perfect while in Japan. And after some bug fixes and an English translation, it was finally made available for fans to play.
Okay, that's really awesome. I did already talk about how it's really cool that SNK has all these older games that are still available to play on modern hardware. The fact that they were even able to go back and finish this game that had been canceled in development in order to give it to us now in the modern day, that's awesome.
Now, even though it's largely the same experience as 5 Special, there were still some differences, namely a complete reversal of the story/violence conundrum from last time. To include the cutscenes and dialogue, the team had to make cuts somewhere, which meant a bunch of fatality effects needed to be removed, as every single frame of animation was precious. You could still perform overkills, mind you, but the bisectings, beheadings, and amount of blood was removed or greatly toned down. And while it wasn't as bad as the censored fatalities from the home ports of Special, it was still a letdown that the perfect version of 5 was still missing some elements. Now, in a classic case of good old monkey's paw, this was eventually 100% corrected in 2022, not with a patch, but with an EX Arcadia release of Perfect, which some of you may know meant that it was essentially useless to most of the world.
Oh, okay. What's an EX Arcadia? Are we buying a whole ass like arcade machine in order to play this version of Samurai Shodown Perfect? Is that what's happening? Is that what this service is? I don't know. If I was like literally drowning in money, I think it'd be cool to have like a little room dedicated to being like a personal arcade. Could be a good place for inviting friends over and hanging out and playing some old ass video games that I don't know, that just sounds like a great time. But I'm certainly not one of those bigger YouTubers making millions of dollars every year, so that dream may never happen.
Regardless, 5 Perfect remains one of the more interesting pieces of the franchise's history, as it came down to pure luck that it was unearthed and made playable 15 years after its initial
Still cool historical facts.
Cancellation. But now we need to circle back around to the game it was originally sacrificed for, which just so happens to also be one of the most bizarre showdowns ever made.
This is where Iraha was introduced. Interesting. Okay. What made this one bizarre?
With 5 Special being the last commercially developed Neo Geo game, SNK had to find new hardware in which to power their future slate of titles, and eventually landed on Sammy's Atomus Wave arcade board. This gave us the likes of the not-so-good KOF Neo Wave and the very-so-good KOF 11, and so it was decided it was going to power the last 2D pixel-based entry in their premier weapon-based fighting series. Samurai Shodown 6 appeared in arcades in late 2005 and early 2006 for the PS2, but only in Japan. Yes, this didn't receive any sort of standalone English port until it was included in a collection a full 2 years later. Now, unlike all the games I've already covered, Samurai Shodown 6 was staunchly a non-canon dream match, as it collects every single playable samurai from every single 2D game and every single control configuration from said games. So try to think of 6 more like Hyper Street Fighter 2, which let fans mix and match playstyles from across a variety of different eras.
Not gonna lie, that sounds fucking awesome. Especially if you've been a fan of the series the entire time. Being able to just play the version of the character that you wanted, or just to have the freedom to select which version of the character that you play that you wanted. It's just like, that's crazy. There's so many layers to it, and every single match feels like it could be completely different.
Balance be damned. Now, that seems extremely not typical for a numbered sequel, right? Well, that's because this, much like most of the other games, was not a numbered sequel in Japan, but was actually called Samurai Spirits, Tale of the World's Greatest Swordsman, which is at least a bit more appropriate for a crazy, over-the-top dream match. Now, there's not
The West.
much in the way of story for this one, outside its unhinged localization. But as hinted at in the cutscenes from 5
Yeah, East versus West. It's so epic.
Yoshitora decided to host a massive tournament or festival all across the world to crown its strongest fighter, and there were quite a few who were vying for that title. In total, there were 48 characters in which to choose from, with the home releases adding even more on top of the arcade original, like
Hardware
a bunch of
upgrade.
playable animals such as Poppy, Mama Haha, and cheeky little Paku Paku. It wasn't only a bunch of sprite recycling though, as SNK had gone the extra mile by redrawing Cham Cham, Wanfu, Ziger, Genan, and also 4 completely new characters, and they're some of the craziest that the series has ever had. First up was Andrew, based loosely on the 7th President of the United States, and who of course fought with a gun. Iroha, a timid but deadly servant / crane spirit, who was decidedly less timid whenever she entered the ring. Then we had Suguroko, a comic relief style character who wielded a fireworks cannon of all things. And finally, there was perhaps the weirdest character in the entire series, Okamaro, a robot-like mecha doll who looked like they came straight out of Guilty Gear. There was one last new inclusion, and that was a special boss variant that wasn't even playable in the home ports, named Demon Gao, who, if you can believe it, is an even more pissed off version of Gao. While certainly containing a mammoth roster, the new fighters and backgrounds stood out, and not in a good way when compared to the older assets, especially since the stages now had some 3D elements which didn't mesh particularly well with the character sprites. Unfortunately, none of the old stages were reused here at all, which was a shame because they look better than what was newly created for this entry. The entire voice cast was also changed for the original arcade version, which displeased many fans, along with the game's soundtrack, which was also compared unfavorably when stacked up against the bangers of past entries.
That's a bit of a shame. I feel like this massive collection of characters and the layers of strategy you can have due to the mechanics that they've chosen to provide here could have made this into a really cool game, like a Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, essentially, for Samsho fans. But we're missing a couple of elements that people really, really would want, and maybe it was outside of our control in that regard.
Although it should be noted that SNK did reinstate all the older voice actors in all their proper roles for the Japanese PS2 home port. And while it was fantastic that you could choose between the basic playstyles of Samsho 1 or 2 and apply those to any character, a lot of legacy system mechanics were removed because of it. One such example was the fact that 6 was, and still is, the least violent main game in the entire series, as not a single drop ever got spilt. There were no forfeits, no overkills, no amputations, dissections, or blood sprays, which was a bummer considering this release was all about paying homage to the past. Still though, despite the issues with the presentation, Samurai Shodown 6 was a pretty damn good value proposition. As I mentioned earlier, it was included in the Anthology release, which came out in 2008 on the PS2, PSP, and Nintendo Wii. And there's even been an unofficial Dreamcast Atomus Wave port that's easy to get working. But the fact remains, 6, or Tale of the World's Greatest Swordsman, didn't revive the series to any serious degree, as it represented the last time that 2D sprites would ever be used, as SNK would go back to polygons and a completely different developer moving forwards.
That is really a shame. We missed the mark on a couple of things, and it turned out to be a bit too many things for this to really take off for the fan base or the greater FGC as a whole. It's a really cool idea, though. Although, actually, I give the example of like a Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. This is basically a King of Fighters, but Samsho edition. You never know. Maybe in the future we can mess around with this idea a bit more and actually do it properly. Do it with the things that the people who love your games would want to see from those games. What is that? We're back to 3D now.
As previously mentioned, the anthology collection was released in 2008, a year that also marked the 15th anniversary of Samurai Shodown itself, so not only were SNK celebrating the series' past, but they had also wanted to establish its future. That unfortunately turned out to be Samurai Shodown Sen, or as the arcade version was known as in much of the world, Samurai Shodown Edge of Destiny. Thanks, Tim Langdell. This was developed by K2, the studio behind Countdown Vampires and the Tenchu game starting from Wrath of Heaven, ran on the Taito Type X2 board, and is considered a non-canon side story. In terms of plot, to be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure what it was actually about. An orphan girl from Europe, apparently washed ashore on the beaches of Japan, was raised by a local lord for 10 years, and then I guess a tournament breaks out. Regardless of the plot, or lack thereof, Sen was just an excuse to collect both old and new fighters and present them in full 3D, and I mean full 3D, as it played much closer to the likes of Soul Calibur, but without all the appealing good stuff. Before I get to that...
Oh no, dude. No. It's always rough, though, when you're always going to be compared to something that has had so much more time to cook than you have. And granted, I don't know which Soul Calibur was out at the time, so maybe Soul Calibur was also shooting itself in the foot back then, but regardless, I feel like the gameplay of Soul Calibur has always been developed around this, and this is more of just an experimentation, once again, for the Samurai Shodown team, that we're just not going to be up to par with what Soul Calibur had figured out at the time.
Though I'd like to break down the roster, as it was one of Sen's few redeeming qualities. Almost all of the fighters from the Samsho 4 era were back, but with one random outlier, that being Wan Fu, who returned using his traditional trusty Dao. The new characters were an eclectic bunch who mostly hailed from around the globe, starting with Susuhime, the adopted European nobility I mentioned earlier. She was presented as Sen's new protagonist, and, unlike the North American version, was prominently displayed on the Japanese box art. We then had Blackhawk, the first Native American to join the series, Walter, a traditional European knight, Angelica, a slender assassin from Istanbul, Kyrian, a swashbuckling Spaniard, Claude, the bodyguard of Susuhime, who washed ashore with her, Hae Ryong Kim, a spear fighter and the franchise's first representative from South Korea, Garos, a burly Viking from Norway, Takeshio, a 19-year-old sword fighter trained under the watchful eye of Haomaru, Jinbei Sugimata, a wise but retired old soul who was protecting Susuhime, and finally Jay, a sailor who wound up in Japan during his travels and who quickly adopted to the samurai lifestyle. There are also two brand new bosses, Draco, a gunfighting mercenary from the Old West and the murderer of Galford's father, and then we had Golba, a straight-laced soldier from the same fictional European country that Susuhime had originally sailed from. Both these big bads were unplayable in the arcade version of Sen, but were made unlockable via code in the Xbox 360 port, which has to be one of the oddest facts about this particular entry. For whatever reason, this game was only ever ported to the Xbox 360 in both Japan and the rest of the world after the initial publishing deal fell apart with Ignition, and was then later picked up by Exceed in 2010. I'm not sure who was responsible for that decision, but a port to the PS Triple Ballin might have really helped, Sen actually sell decently in Japan. But what really didn't help it sell was the savage beating it took from pretty much every media outlet that reviewed it, as all of them heavily criticized the lengthy load times, the in-game visuals, clunky gameplay, and its ghost town of an online community. I do have to give it credit for three specific things though. The presentation leading up to the matches was absolutely outstanding, featuring stylized, colorful character art and flourishes that really made you feel like you're playing Samsho. The second thing was the soundtrack, which was both atmospheric and exhibited high production value. And the last notable thing, and forgive me for the pun here, was very much a double-edged sword. SNK and K2 had really upped the violence on this one, as it let you freely behead, amputate, and bisect your opponents in all kinds of gruesome ways. This is pretty funny, as it was the complete opposite situation on how the series had handled violence in the past.
It really feels like we just can't, we don't know. We can't make up our minds here. It either becomes a part of the series or you remove it entirely. We can't just keep like stepping in on one side, stepping on the other side, and trying to appeal to both crowds here. But you know what? At the very least, what Samsho has going for it is that it didn't try to sell blood as a DLC. Isn't that right, Warhammer 3?
With the Western versions being the censored ones. But in Sen's case, it was reversed, with the Japanese version containing none of the aforementioned gore.
Brother,
I appreciated that they wanted to correct the mistakes made in 6, but I do feel like they once again went a bit overboard here, as geysers of Xbox 360 era red jelly made for a rather garish display, and it just felt a bit much. Worse than that, though, was the gameplay, as Sen bore very little resemblance to actual Samsho, leaning more into grounded, realistic combat over fantastical special moves and techniques. And yeah, that was the very brief attempt to try to rejuvenate Samurai Shodown for what was then the modern audience, as it spectacularly failed to accomplish that goal.
Yeah, just looks like it appeals to no one.
It's a toss-up between Sen and Warrior's Rage on the PS1 as to what the worst entry in the series actually is. But speaking for me personally, I believe that dubious honor still goes to the latter. At least Sen's new cast of characters were unique, represented far more countries than ever before, and had the potential to make a comeback down the line. Speaking of comebacks, it would be a long time before Samurai Shodown would get another one, as fans had to wait 11 more years for another. But thankfully, when they eventually did, it wound up being one well worth the wait.
Okay, that's good. Hey, this is all that we played. All right, we're here now. Samurai Shodown. How much longer do we have to wait for the next one?
After the success of the King of Fighters 14, SNK were able to spread their wings a little bit more and start work on a brand new Samurai Shodown, which made sense considering it had always been one of the company's most prolific franchises.
What the hell? Just randomly decided to load? Okay. I don't know how Samsho is doing comparatively to a lot of the other series that SNK is currently working on. Because, like, right now, the KOF's getting updates. They even went back to update Art of Fighting. They are still actively working on City of the Wolves. So is Samsho still being cooked somewhere in the background? We're just going to, like, shadow drop it like SNK does sometimes. I have a little bit of confidence in it, though, considering how Nakaruru is kind of iconic to SNK. Because apparently, I didn't know this until we got into a lot of the SNK lore and stuff, but Nakaruru was essentially the kind of like that Chun-Li character, but for SNK. Except I suppose nowadays it's probably going to be Mai Shiranui who represents SNK and like what people think of. Like it's going to be Mai, it's going to be Terry. Those are the characters that get all the collabs. Oh, I can't forget about Iori too. But you know, hopefully someday Samsho returns with better netcode.
Directed by Nobuyuki Kuroki, a longtime SNK staff member from the 90s who primarily worked on the Fatal Fury series and Samsho 64, this Unreal-powered reboot released in 2019 on pretty much everything. PlayStation 4, Xbox One series, whatever, Steam, Nintendo Switch, a Japanese-only arcade version, Netflix, and even something called the Google Stadia. Now, while the term reboot might have given fans some initial pause, it really just plucked some of the most popular characters from all over the franchise's chronology, along with some fresh blood, and mixed that together with refined mechanics that were again culled from all the classic games. The plot didn't conflict with any particular entry, as it also worked as a prequel of sorts to much of the series' later events, and revolved around the rise of a new evil force that had possessed the spirit of Shizuka Gozen, a female figure from Japanese history. The initial default roster was a veritable who's who of Samsho: Haomaru, Genjuro, Galford, Hanzo, Nakaruru, Jubei, Charlotte, Tam Tam, Earthquake, Yukio, Kiroshiro, Yoshitora, and most likely due to the director's past work on Samsho 64, Shiki, which made this her first playable appearance since, to the best of my recollection, SVC Chaos. Oh wait, no, I mean Battle Coliseum. 3 new characters joined the fray as well. A stealthy samurai with shadowy Tengu powers named Yashimaru Kurama, a clumsy shield/compass-wielding Ruri Sheng, and finally, the surly booze-drinking, freewheeling, boat-sailing Dark.
Whoa, Darlie, she only got her introduction to here. That's kind of insane. And she's even in like KOF 15, so this one did really well for itself. Also, they kind of knocked her design out of the park. Definitely like one of my favorite designs from the game. We were talking about it when Serby and I were going through the KOF like character designs. But there's just something so cool about how much detail was in her character design, which usually doesn't work, but it just kind of did for some reason.
SNK went on to support this new Samsho with 3 seasons of DLC. Season 1 was composed of Basara, Kazuki, Rimururu, Shizumaru, and finally Wanfu, who went back to swinging around his big ol' weird column thing from Samsho 2. The second season brought back fan favorites like Sugetsu, Mina, Iroha, and introduced guest characters for the very first time, although they probably weren't what players had expected. Bunny-eared Gongsun Lee from the MOBA Honor of Kings, and very much to be outdone, the Warden from For Honor, which is... wow, I was just reminded that For Honor was a thing. Season 3 was the smallest one, but it packed quite a punch as it brought back Amakusa, Cham Cham, and 2 more very appropriate guests, Hibiki Takane from The Last Blade, and Baiken from Guilty Gear, one of the more inspired fighting game crossovers in recent years. In total,
it was so inspired that Cade constantly keeps getting confused. It's like, Baiken is from Samsho or Guilty Gear. Baiken just fits so well into the Samsho like setting. I guess you could say in some ways the Warden from For Honor too also fits, but like, Did anybody really want this character? I don't know.
The game packed in 30 characters, the second highest roster behind Samsho 6. Gameplay was elegant as it focused on dodging, defense-breaking push throws, counters, and utilizing the rage meter for supers and lightning blade attacks, which still did ridiculous amounts of damage. The flow of the moment-to-moment combat was very much in line with the classic Samsho feel, where it was more about footsies and the lethality of a well-timed special move, and less about lengthy combos, juggling, and throws.
Okay, that's really good. That I did at least get a taste of what the classic Samurai Shodown was trying to go for. I definitely feel like the gameplay was super tight. It's really unfortunate that throughout its history, it seems like Samsho has strayed away from this, when I feel like this is kind of its lifeblood. Like, this is the gameplay that people are looking for, the thing that sets it apart from everything else.
While overkills were not included, there was still plenty of bloodshed, as many super attacks, ESENs, and specials would produce similar gore effects to those from the classic games.
Goddamn.
It wasn't all perfect though, as upon launch, SNK did receive criticism for Samurai Shodown's lengthy load times during the single-player arcade ladder, as well as its very spotty performance during online play, which was eventually alleviated with the introduction of rollback netcode, although that did take 4 years to be implemented across all versions, and still not for the Switch. If you're looking for a particular
I mean, it's implemented. It's a little bit questionable rollback, but it is what it is. At the very least, it is rollback. It's not delay-based. Looking at you, Soul Calibur.
Place to jump into the franchise, you can't do much better than right here. It has a great selection of fighters from across the series' history,
it was so much
colorful, appealing art style, system mechanics that aren't too overwhelming, and is pretty much available on anything, even the Google Stadia. And I mean, you know, it also has Baiken.
That is a massive plus for sure. Baiken is also incredibly strong, apparently. From what I've heard listening to like Evo matches and stuff like that, like Baiken is just rated as one of the strongest characters in the game. But yeah, I expect anybody watching this to have already played this, but if for some reason you haven't, I do highly recommend it, especially if you have a friend to practice with. Even better if you guys are in person. I think this game is just so fun to play even at a basic level, and yet there are enough mechanics there and I guess optimizations with your neutral play that there's so much to learn, master, and explore.
And that's where we currently stand with Samurai Shodown, at least when it comes to the main entries. But before I square off with the spin-offs and other media, there is one last aspect regarding the series chronology I feel I should explain before we move on, because it would have been a bit confusing if I had peppered it in throughout this retrospective. So let me come right out and say it, the series timeline is totally, completely screwed up. You know how Tekken goes in a straight line? Yeah, Samurai Shodown doesn't do that. It's more like Street Fighter in that way, with several games taking place out of order when compared to their numbered sequel status. And that's due to two reasons. One, storyline purposes, and two, some poor decisions that were made during the localization process. So please allow me to make some sense of it for you now. The first showdown that chronologically takes place at the start of the timeline was not in fact the first game, but the fifth. This is why Amakusa was not present and focuses on a completely different conflict. Another big hint was the fact that in Japan, Samurai Shodown 5 was not called 5, but 0. Again, much like the Street Fighter Alpha series being the localized name. There's problems with this, of course, as Shizumaru, Kazuki, and Sugetsu appear, and 3 and 4 were the games that introduced them as the new central characters, but yeah, you better start getting used to those kind of plot holes now. Following that, we have the events of 1, which are pretty self-explanatory, but that doesn't last for too long because Samurai Shodown 3 was the one that directly follows it. This was because Amakusa was demoted to the main roster, which gave Zankuro a chance to slip in as the new final boss. I guess Kuza was pretty salty about that though, and that's why the next game was Samurai Shodown 4 Amakusa's Revenge, despite him being on the main roster again and not even the final boss, which was a bit confusing in and of itself. And finally, after that, we have 2, where Mizuki took charge, because as far as we know, both Amakusa and Zankuro were dead by that time, never to return. But return they did! As stated earlier, Samurai Shodown 6 was a non-canon dream match and featured every single character and boss, so it doesn't really matter where you place this one. Now, the Sam Show 64 series is kind of considered an outlier, and while there's debate whether it's canon or not, you can at least say they simply work as their own separate thing. You got Sam Show 64, Sam Show 64 Warriors Rage, and then lastly, and also leastly, Sam Show Warriors Rage PlayStation Edition. Now, I've seen some speculation online that Samurai Shodown Sen also fits in between there, but I'm fine leaving it by itself.
I mean, at this point, I feel like you should just look at it as like a Fatal Fury and King of Fighters situation, where yes, but no, the timeline following a little bit, but it's also kind of doing its own thing in its own separate timeline. I don't think that they had ever intended for all of this to be like one playable, consecutive, linear story. It was always more about the fighting and the gameplay, and I do hope that they come back to the story side of things, as I talked about previously, not going to reiterate on that. But putting it all on a timeline here and trying to make sense of it can be pretty fun at times. This one, this definitely looks pretty funny, just like as an overview.
Finally, there's Sam Show 2019. It's possibly the start of a new timeline, so that can work just by itself, but it's also been said that it's technically a prequel, so you can even put that at the very start of the main chronology. But really, that's up for the viewer to decide. And there you have it, the complete chronology. However, there are 2 more non-fighting games that I haven't placed yet, but I would be remiss if I didn't give them their just due. Remember when I mentioned that the series creator Yasushi Adachi was busy with another title around 1996? Well, that was because he was developing Shinsetsu Samurai Spirit's Bushido Retsuden, or as it was more commonly known in gaming magazines back in the 90s, Samurai Shodown RPG. This was released on the Neo Geo CD, PlayStation, and Saturn in 1997, and originally was going to have a very bizarre model where different chapters that covered the events of the first 3 Samurai Shodown games would be exclusive to certain platforms, forcing players to have to buy 2 different copies to get the full experience.
I fucking hate that practice. It seems like a common thing though at the time. But on like separate platforms though, like holy dude. Was it Soul Calibur 2 or something that did that with like Yoda, Darth Vader, Starkiller on a different consoles? Or actually, no, I might have been thinking of different characters and that was a different game. That might have been Soul Calibur 3. But regardless, there was an addition to Soul Calibur where DLC characters were locked to specific consoles and you just had to, you only had those if you only owned that console. I forget which one Spawn and Heihachi were in. Also Link 2. That was probably Soul Calibur 2 now that I think about it. Or you even like Fire Emblem Fates, right? Where you have all the different routes, but you have to buy 3 different cartridges in order to play them and experience them. I guess at the very least, they're different cartridges, so you just buy the game again and again instead of a whole new console. But man, we had some evil business tactics.
The Samsho 3 chapter was eventually cut due to the development dragging on, while the backlash from players in regards to the news that SNK was planning to double dip thankfully caused them to cancel those poorly laid plans.
Good.
Sadly, despite some teases on SNK's part, Samsho RPG was never officially localized and brought over to the West. It's a game that took from the newer, more detailed art style that they were exploring with Samurai Shodown 3, but expanded things out and all over Japan, where you experience an unfolding story through the eyes of several playable characters you chose at the outset. While the main plot thread and progression remain largely the same, you got completely new dialogue, attacks, and special events depending on who you selected, leading to plenty of replay value as you engaged in turn-based random battles, visiting towns, and slash through bandit-filled dungeons, meeting tons of familiar samurai along the way. Now, despite the long delays the project saw, Adachi stated that its development was quite arduous. It's actually a really impressive spin-off that totally feels like a legit RPG from the mid to late 90s. And I know this because I enjoyed it myself via an incredible fan translation that was headed up by The Price of Reason, which was dubbed Samurai Shodown Tales of the Bushido, and is well worthy of that lofty title. I strongly suggest if you are a fan of the series, RPGs, or both, to check it out via the links in the description box below.
Yeah, that sounds pretty darn cool. Getting to explore more of the story side, getting to learn more about the characters in a spin-off game like this is a pretty great idea. And there are plenty of fighting games out there that I hope do something similar to this. Like genuinely, I think Soul Calibur could become just a straight up RPG game, because of the world building and everything that they've set up so far, can make for so many fun and interesting stories that unfortunately you don't exactly get to experience the full depth of the world through the fighting game itself. So yeah, we can just have a separate game like this in order to sell that, but maybe it's always going to be a massive risk, right? Whether people would be into it or not, because RPGs aren't exactly the easiest thing to make. Not exactly the most cost-efficient thing either.
It shouldn't be too surprising then that if a gorgeous, detailed, action-packed RPG wasn't being brought over to the West, then an early 2000s visual novel wasn't going to be either. Nakaruru, the gift that came from that person, was a Windows-based Japanese-only VM that focused on who else but the spiritualistic nature girl herself. There was an obscure Dreamcast port that was released in 2002 that I didn't even know existed until making this video, which was rather weird considering Samsho fighting games never officially made their way to Sega's final console before or after, but this somehow did. Anyway, there's not much to say about it. You click around Nakaruru's village, converse with a bunch of characters, and try to find that person that gave you a gift, I'm assuming. This also got an English fan translation back in 2023, which truly shows the dedication of the Shodown fanbase, especially since they translated the subtitle to The Gift She Gave Me, which makes a bit more sense. But if you truly call yourself dedicated, then you must be familiar with Samurai Shodown, the motion picture, which was released in 1994 and was spectacularly, unsurprisingly bad.
Yeah, we've seen these for Fatal Fury and King of Fighters already, so there were attempts at this. I don't think they ever really picked up or were popular in any sort of way, but they are kind of funny to look back on. Actually, I believe that there is a character in City of the Wolves Season 3, or is it Season 2? I think it's Season 3, that originated from the motion picture for Fatal Fury. So there's that, I guess. Very curious to know what the character does, because obviously I've not seen the anime for it.
Of course, anime based on fighting games didn't really have the best track record, but even then, considering this was marketed as a movie, in the West at least, it's way below the expected level of quality. Say what you will about Fatal Fury the motion picture, but that at least had some great scope and some really impressive shots and fighting choreography. Sam's show, on the other hand, feels like a random low-budget 3-episode series cobbled together and padded out to 68 minutes, which it actually was. It originally aired on the Fuji TV network, and thus never technically made it to theaters. Its general quality and refusal to follow the game's story can be chalked up to the fact that SNK gave the animation studio and producers free rein to just do whatever, which is why character personalities and allegiances were all over the place, and some were just relegated to super brief.
Apologies for the random cut there, but mid-recording, my computer decided to blue screen. Don't worry, everything is fine. The video file should be safe, and this is why we recorded MKV format. And hopefully I fixed the issue. Just needed to update the BIOS and whatnot. But yeah, that's what happened. Let's continue with the video.
Cameos. Fortunately, SNK gave dramatization a second shot with Samurai Spirits 2 Asura Zanmaden, which was a 2-episode OVA that was released in 1999 on a Laserdisc, and eventually DVD, but unfortunately only in Japan. While the animations and designs certainly looked the part this time around, this was more or less made as marketing fluff for the launch of Samurai Shodown 64 Warrior's Rage, the arcade one, and didn't take any time to set up the characters or world, as it's pretty much a glorified cutscene setting up the game's events. And finally, there was an anime based on Nakaruru because of course there was. It was originally slated to be 13 episodes long, then had that number cut down to 2, and then had that number cut down to 1, resulting in a single 28-minute episode simply because they ran out of money. This essentially was just going to...
I mean, this was SNK as well. We were pretty much struggling with getting the funds for all the projects that we really wanted to do, so it's understandable. It's still just such a shame, though, that we haven't gotten like a full-fledged adaptation. There's so many stories that could be told in this setting, but we just don't have the money for it. Or there aren't really any investors who are willing to take that sort of risk.
Be an anime retelling of the visual novel's plot, and if these designs looked a little bit familiar, it's because they were overseen by Yasuomi Umetsu, the guy who created and wrote Kite and Mezzo Forte. I hope that, that this didn't have a scene where... and that concludes the spin-off / other media section of this retrospective.
Don't know what that was alluding to.
Yeah, I know there was like a pachinko game or two,
but of course there were.
Who cares? All told, Samurai Shodown.
I have to assume during the whole buyout of SNK and was it Aruzi or whatever that company was called that turned King of Fighters and Fatal Fury, I think it was Fatal Fury, into the pachinko machines and had their own thing and plotline and whatnot. Samurai Shodown probably received the same treatment.
Shodown is in a pretty good place right now. SNK has indicated that the 2019 reboot did pretty good business, thanks Baiken, Iroha, and Shiki, with the series even crossing over to other games, such as Haomaru slashing his way into Soul Calibur 6, and Team Samurai making an appearance in KOF 15. And while SNK has said that a new fighting game isn't currently in development, that doesn't mean that they're done with samurais having showdowns, as they did confirm that a new action RPG based on the series has entered production, which to me personally is really exciting.
I'd say that sounds really freaking cool. If it does release, I'll definitely have to check it out. I suppose it's fair, though, that they're not really working on a new one just yet, because there are already so many that they're supporting, plus a bunch of older titles that they're going back to once again support. So they probably already have a ton of projects on their plate right now. Best not put something and just half-ass it, especially not something like Sam's show.
Because as we've seen, the series has dozens upon dozens of exotic, interesting characters of which to pull from and expand on. From honorable swordsmen to shadowy ninjas, bloodthirsty lunatics, mysterious assassins, and even a hefty helping of the supernatural and the bizarre. And as we've explored each and every game, I expect some of you to have grown to appreciate just how well the series represented the majesty of feudal Japan through the magic of pixel graphics and even the occasional polygon. The cherry blossoms, the foaming seas, the shafts of light peeking through thick bamboo.
Iconic, man.
SNK made sure to perfectly capture that same natural beauty along with the sudden violent juxtaposition of blood filling the air. I sincerely hoped you enjoyed this retrospective. Thanks to all the editors and the Price of Reason for helping with this video. And if you'd like me to take a look back at any other series of games, do let me know in the comments below or over on my social media. I'm Matt McMuscles, and I'll see you next time.
Alrighty, my dudes. That was a pretty neat dive into the history of Samurai Shodown. Just seeing the ups and downs and the different experimental ideas that they had for the series leading up to what we had played like a month or two ago was kind of satisfying to see, really. Hopefully this redemption arc continues and someday we get a new Sam show, because I really, really enjoyed my time playing that game. And I'm pretty sure I said this in the previous part, but if you guys want me to check out the Samurai Shodown lore separately, please do let me know and give your suggestions of what I should check out. If there's anything else that you guys want to suggest, also feel free to leave them in the comments. But for now, that's going to do it for today. So thank you guys so much for joining me. Hope you guys enjoyed your time here. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And I'll catch you guys in the next one.